hidden door, a silent scream, and a bell that rang by itself. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you joining us from tonight? Your comments always bring this channel to life. Let's begin. The bell tower of St. Everilda's School had long cast a shadow across the Yorkshire moor, not just in stature, but in story. Built in 1831 and ringed with ivy, the Gothic tower loomed above the rest of the ancient girls' school, like a sentinel, watching through cracked stone and weather-stained gargoyles. Villagers whispered of odd things, candlelight seen at midnight, cloaked figures near the tower door, and, most chilling of all, the sound of the bell tolling at times it should not. But on the second morning of June, the bell rang with reason. It was 8 o'clock, and the staff and pupils had gathered for breakfast. Tea was poured, porridge ladled, and the sun was unusually bright for the North Riding. Then the screaming began. The bell had stopped ringing, not of its own accord, but because the bell ringer, Miss Claudia Fielding, the school's long-time music mistress, had fallen dead at its base. She had been found by the groundskeeper, Mr. Marchbanks, who'd come up to complain about the early tolling. What he saw instead was the broken body of the woman, her neck twisted at an impossible angle, her eyes open, mouth parted in an unfinished scream. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, only the limp, lifeless form of Miss Fielding, sprawled in the stone alcove beneath the ancient bell. The police arrived within the hour. Constable Redding, earnest but overwhelmed, did what he could. The bell tower's sole access door had been locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The only key was found in the folds of the deceased's skirt. By lunchtime, the local coroner gave his solemn opinion: accidental death. She likely slipped, he muttered. Old stairs, poor lighting. But whispers had already started to coil through the dining halls and dormitories. Miss Fielding had not slipped. No, she had been frightened. Some said she'd recently quarrelled with the headmistress. Others insisted she had grown oddly paranoid, jumping at shadows, locking her room at night, leaving peculiar notes in the music room desk. She claimed someone was following her, whispered one of the sixth form girls. That something about the bell tower was wrong. She kept saying she knew a secret. The whispers grew louder when it was revealed that Claudia Fielding had been engaged once, briefly and quietly, to a man who vanished during the war, a man whose name she never spoke, a man, rumour had it, who was connected to the school in ways the faculty preferred not to discuss. 3 days later, as the staff tried to return to routine and the scent of lilies still hung in the chapel air, a letter arrived. It was addressed to the chairwoman of the Board of Governors. The envelope bore no return address but had been sent from London. Inside was a neatly typed letter, written in a commanding yet courteous tone, requesting, no, insisting, that the writer be permitted to investigate the matter of Miss Fielding's death, not on behalf of the police, but privately, discreetly, thoroughly. The writer signed off simply, Hercule Poirot, Rue des Petits Champs, London. The board had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. Some had read about his exploits in the dailies. Others had heard the name in drawing rooms and on radio murmurs. A few scoffed at the melodrama of involving a celebrity detective, but the school's headmistress, Dr. Isadora Linley, approved it. Quietly, firmly. If there is something amiss, she said, her voice as taut as a violin string, Monsieur Poirot will find it. And so, the summons was issued. On the morning of June 9th, the gatekeeper opened the school's side door to admit a small man with a stiff hat, patent leather shoes, a charcoal grey suit without a wrinkle, and a moustache that could have been sculpted by Michelangelo. He stepped inside, surveyed the hall with eyes like polished glass, and nodded once, precisely. Bon, said Hercule Poirot softly. Now, We shall see what secrets a bell tower can keep. Poirot's shoes made no sound on the flagstone corridor as he walked alongside Dr. Isadora Linley, the headmistress of St. Everilda's. She was a tall, angular woman in her late 50s, dressed in a sharply tailored skirt suit of navy wool. Her hair was drawn back into a severe bun that emphasized the hollows beneath her cheekbones. Though composed, she had the pinched look of someone who had not slept well in days. "There is, of course," she said, glancing sideways at Poirot as they passed the chapel, "no official suspicion of foul play. The coroner was quite clear." "Mais naturellement," Poirot murmured, hands clasped neatly behind his back. "The unfortunate Miss Fielding, she falls, n'est-ce pas? And yet, she locks the door behind her before doing so? Curious, non?" Dr. Linley's lips thinned. "We are a school, Monsieur Poirot, an institution built on stability. The last thing we need is a reputation for ghosts and secrets." "I quite understand," Poirot said gently. "But it is not the reputation I investigate. It is the truth." They entered the main staff room, which was, despite the summer weather, gloomy. Leaded windows let in fractured light. Shelves lined with books and dusty trophies hugged the walls. In front of the fireplace stood a collection of chairs, recently rearranged to accommodate the unexpected visitor. 4 people waited there. Dr. Linley introduced them one by one. "This is Mr. Roland Marsh, our mathematics master. He's been with us 8 years. Marsh was in his 30s, pale and slightly stooped, with gold-rimmed glasses and a nervous blink. He nodded but did not offer his hand. Miss Eleanor Draycott teaches literature and supervises the 6th form girls' dormitory. She was closest to Claudia." Draycott, a handsome woman with dark auburn hair and an air of weary elegance, gave Poirot a long, assessing look. "She was a complicated woman," she said, "and nothing more. Mrs. Judith Haynes, our school nurse." Mrs. Haynes had the robust, no-nonsense bearing of a woman used to blood and fever. Her uniform was crisp, her manner efficient. "Claudia came to see me 2 weeks ago," she offered, before being asked. "Said she hadn't been sleeping. I gave her valerian root." "And finally," said Dr. Linley, "Mr. Dennis Bray, groundskeeper. It was he who found Miss Fielding." Bray was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with rough hands and a distant gaze. He offered a small, respectful nod, eyes flicking toward Poirot, and then away. "Didn't hear a thing," he said gruffly. "She was just there." Poirot inclined his head in acknowledgement. He took a moment to observe the group, his eyes lingering not just on faces, but hands, shoes, posture, proximity. "Bon," he said softly. "I will not take much of your time now, but I will ask that each of you permit a brief conversation with me later. One at a time. There is no cause for alarm. I seek only clarity where shadows have fallen." Poirot's gaze moved to the window. From this angle, the bell tower was visible, its spire rising past the treetops, haloed in afternoon haze. He studied it silently for a moment. Dr. Linley cleared her throat. "We've temporarily closed the tower, of course. The girls are not permitted anywhere near it." "Excellent," said Poirot. "And the belongings of Mademoiselle Fielding?" "In her quarters. We have not disturbed them." "If you would be so kind." Minutes later, Poirot found himself standing in Miss Claudia Fielding's bedroom. It was small and plainly furnished. An iron-framed bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk under the eaves. Everything was neat, almost obsessively so. The bed was tightly made, a wool shawl folded on the chair, no photographs, no ornaments. A metronome sat on the desk beside a music manuscript, paused mid-beat. Poirot opened the desk drawer carefully. Inside were lined notebooks, bundles of piano sheet music, and, neatly tucked beneath a yellowing diary, a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it with delicacy. The note was typed. The paper was cheap. The message, brief. I know what happened in the bell tower. Meet me there at dawn. Come alone." There was no signature. Poirot held it up to the light, examining the typeface. A manual typewriter. Possibly Remington. A few of the letters had slight misalignment. The E was faint. He noted it and tucked the page back into its envelope. From the wardrobe, he retrieved a handbag. Its contents were unremarkable. Powder compact, a fountain pen, hairpins, a small brass key attached to a ribbon. Poirot held the key between thumb and forefinger. The bell tower key, presumably. The one found on her person. He stared at it for a moment before returning it to its place. Downstairs again, Poirot requested his interviews. Miss Draycott was the first to arrive. She perched on the edge of a chair, ankles neatly crossed, arms folded. "You want to know about Claudia," she said. "Very well. She was brilliant, demanding, rigid, and lonely. She lived for her work and little else." "You say lonely, mademoiselle. Did she have any confidants? Romantic entanglements?" Draycott's lip curled. "If she did, she hid them well. Claudia didn't believe in softness. She believed in precision. And yet she was frightened." Draycott's eyes narrowed. "She was distracted, yes. She told me she felt watched, but she wouldn't say by whom." Poirot considered her words. "Did she mention a secret? Something to do with the bell tower?" "She said it was a place people thought they knew, but that it had a memory. I told her she was being dramatic." He nodded, then gently dismissed her. Roland Marsh followed. He fidgeted with his spectacles and spoke quickly. "I wasn't close to her. Hardly knew her. She wasn't very approachable." "You were in the tower recently, monsieur?" He hesitated. Well, I sometimes go there to smoke. Not often. Never saw her there." Poirot asked him about the typewriters used at the school. Marsh said there were 2 in the administrative office and 1 in the library for students' essays. "All manual." Poirot thanked him and made a note. Next was Mrs. Haynes, who came in with a confident gait and folded her arms. "She told me she had nightmares. I asked if it was stress. She said no, it was something old, something from before." "From before what, madame?" "She didn't say, but I think she meant before the war, or before she came here. There was a grief in her, heavy." Poirot said nothing, but made another note. Finally, Dennis Bray. He was slower to enter, his movements cautious. "She was already cold when I found her," he said. "The bell had stopped. I knew something was wrong." Poirot observed him carefully. "You have been with the school how long?" 14 years. I knew Claudia well enough to nod to, not more." "You have a key to the tower?" Bray shook his head. "Only Miss Fielding. No one else ever wanted to climb all those stairs. And yet someone left her that note." Bray's brow furrowed. "What note?" Poirot smiled politely. "Merci, Monsieur Bray. That will be all." As he sat alone in the staff room afterward, Poirot let the silence settle. A woman had died inside a locked bell tower, summoned by a note typed in anonymity. The suspects were tightly woven into the school's traditions and routines. All had opportunity. Some had motive. And someone, Poirot was certain, was lying. He looked once more at the tower through the window, the wind moving gently through the ivy. "Ah," he whispered, "but you cannot hide guilt behind stone. It leaks through the cracks." He would begin again in the morning, but for now he had enough to start asking the right kind of questions. The next morning brought with it a thin veil of mist that clung to the edges of the moor and curled around the base of the bell tower like a shroud. The breakfast room at St. Everilda's was subdued, the usual clatter of crockery and subdued chatter replaced by silence, broken only by the scrape of cutlery. Poirot sat at a small table near the window, untouched toast on his plate, a steaming pot of tea to his left. He did not eat. He watched. The girls, in their uniforms of dark wool and polished shoes, cast glances at him, some curious, some wary. One or two looked frightened. At the high table, the staff maintained appearances. Dr. Linley scanned the room over her teacup, while Miss Draycott stared into the distance, as if seeing something no one else could. Mr. Marsh fidgeted with his napkin. Mrs. Haynes was not present. Poirot noticed. At precisely 9 o'clock, he rose and made his way to the tower. He had asked to see the site himself, alone. Dr. Linley had acquiesced, albeit reluctantly, providing the original key recovered from Miss Fielding's body. The door gave a low groan as he opened it. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp stone and old dust. The spiral staircase rose tightly against the wall, its iron rail cold beneath his gloved fingers. He ascended slowly, counting the steps, noting where the moss grew between the mortar, where the treads dipped from long use, where a person might slip if they were not careful. He reached the chamber beneath the bell, a round, narrow space, with slatted windows and worn wooden beams. Here was where Claudia Fielding had fallen. The floor had been scrubbed, but Poirot crouched and examined the stone all the same. A faint discoloration, perhaps. No blood. No signs of struggle. He stood and examined the rope that hung from the bell. It swayed slightly in the morning breeze filtering in from the tower's highest windows. The space was small, only enough for one person to move freely. There was nowhere to hide, no second door. The only way in or out was the stairwell behind him. And yet... Poirot turned slowly, surveying the chamber. Something was wrong. Not in the facts, but in the feeling. He studied the windows. Iron slats. One of them, toward the north, had what looked like a scrape on the sill. A faint abrasion, perhaps no more than a bird's claw or a falling branch. But Poirot noted it. Then, a sound behind him. He turned. Mr. Dennis Bray stood halfway up the stairs, hat in hand, a hesitant look on his face. "Forgive me," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude. I was coming to oil the outer gate." Poirot did not believe him for a moment, but he smiled politely. "Come, monsieur, let us look together, if you are here already. Tell me, when you found Mademoiselle Fielding, exactly where did she lie?" Bray stepped up, pointing toward the center of the chamber. "Here, face down, her head turned toward the bell rope." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the door? It was locked." "From the inside, yes. I had to call the constable to break it." "And you are certain she was alone?" Bray's expression did not change. "There was no one else." You are observant." "I try to be." Poirot's eyes drifted to the narrow window again. "Tell me, monsieur, has anyone ever climbed out that window?" Bray blinked. "Climb out? Number." "Not unless they were mad. That drop would kill a man." Poirot's expression grew still. "But not necessarily a young girl." Bray frowned. "A girl." "Ah," Poirot said, dismissing the thought with a flick of the fingers. "You must forgive the wanderings of a curious mind." "I thank you, monsieur." Back in the main building, Poirot asked to inspect the typewriters. He was led to the small administrative office off the front vestibule. It was cramped, lined with filing cabinets, and smelled of carbon paper. 2 manual machines sat on the desk. Poirot inspected them both. He typed a few letters. The E on the first was clean. The second, slightly faded. A match. He requested access to the library typewriter next. It was an older model and showed considerable wear. The keys clattered under Poirot's fingers. The E here was strong and even. He made a note. Then he paused. The carbon paper in the wastebasket had impressions. Ghostly, reversed letters from a recent page. Poirot gently removed the top sheet, lifting it to the light. It bore no full sentences, only fragments. She suspects 6 a.m. rope. If she talks, dangerous. Key must be Remove. The sheet ended in a smear. Poirot replaced it carefully. Someone had typed a note here, recently, and not one meant for school essays. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested another meeting with Dr. Linley, privately. In her office, surrounded by rows of academic texts and brass-framed photographs of alumni, she poured him tea with a trembling hand. "You're certain," she said, setting the pot down, "that this wasn't an accident?" Poirot inclined his head. "I am not certain of anything, not yet. But Mademoiselle Fielding received a note that lured her to the tower. That much we do know." Dr. Linley paled. "You believe someone here sent it?" "I believe someone wanted her to be alone and frightened. Whether they meant for her to die, that is what remains to be discovered." She pressed her lips together. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Claudia came to me a few days before she died. She asked if the school had kept records, old ones, from the war years." "Which years precisely?" 1942 to 1945. Poirot's brow furrowed. "That is when she joined the staff. She was appointed in 1946, but she wanted to know who had been here before her." Poirot sat back. "Interesting. And did you give her access to these records?" I told her we'd look for them. They were stored in the cellar archive, but she never followed up. I thought she'd let the matter drop." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "She did not drop it. She took her search elsewhere, perhaps too far." There was a silence. Then Poirot stood, his expression unreadable. "Madam, I will need access to those archives, and I believe the past, however buried, may hold the key to Miss Fielding's death." That evening, as dusk fell, and the bell remained ominously silent, Poirot sat in his quarters, surrounded by notes, a map of the school grounds, a list of staff, a copy of Claudia Fielding's employment record, and the letter. He stared at the typeface again. That faint E. He remembered Roland Marsh's twitchy hesitation. He recalled Eleanor Draycott's bitterness. He recalled Bray's sudden appearance at the tower. And he remembered the carbon sheet. The puzzle was forming. And Poirot, eyes sharp and moustache bristling, began to see the picture it concealed. Tomorrow he would explore the archives. And perhaps, just perhaps, the past would speak. The cellar archives of St. Everilda's were hidden behind a thick oak door in the east wing, beneath a rarely used staircase. Poirot descended the stone steps with deliberate caution, lantern in hand, the air turning colder with each footfall. The walls narrowed and then opened into a vault-like room filled with old shelving, stacked with labelled boxes, mildewed ledgers, and rusting file drawers. Dust swirled in the light like a memory resisting recall. Dr. Linley had arranged for the keys and left Poirot to search alone. He preferred it that way. Silence helped him listen, not just to the room, but to his own mind. He began at the far wall. Wartime records, staff appointments, correspondence, and financial logs, yellowing papers that smelled of forgotten years. He examined each folder with the patience of a man who believed nothing was irrelevant. Within the third drawer of a low cabinet, Poirot uncovered a small stack of personnel files, marked 1942 to 1945. He opened them slowly, one by one. There, among the usual names, chaplains, tutors, matrons, was a short employment record for a man named Thomas Addington, grounds assistant, hired March 1943, terminated October 1944. No reason listed. Unusual. Poirot studied the man's photograph. A square jaw, dark hair, sunken eyes. There was something sullen in the way he looked into the lens. On the back of the file, a handwritten note. Conducted private music lessons for 2 upper-form girls. Termination requested by headmistress Miss W.J. Alden. The note was unsigned and undated. He traced his fingers over the name. Why would a grounds assistant be offering music lessons? What had Claudia Fielding discovered about him? Poirot searched further. A thin folder near the bottom contained a letter of complaint, yellowed and nearly torn at the folds. Dated October 5th, 1944. To the Board of Governors, it is with great concern that I report the behaviour of Mr. Thomas Addington, whose presence on school grounds has become increasingly troubling. There have been reports from several pupils that he is seen in areas of the school where he has no duties. One pupil has withdrawn entirely from choir, refusing to return. I advise his immediate removal from staff. C.F. Poirot folded the letter slowly. The initials matched. Claudia Fielding. She had known him, and she had tried even then to remove him. Yet there was no record of disciplinary action, no police report, only quiet dismissal. A quiet cover. Poirot stared into the flickering lantern light. It was becoming clear that Miss Fielding had not gone up that tower simply because of a recent threat. She had gone to face something, or someone, that had been waiting for years. He returned to the main building as evening began to settle in, his mind now alight with direction. In the corridor outside the staff lounge, he encountered Eleanor Draycott again. She stood near the notice board, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You've been in the archives," she said, not asking. Poirot inclined his head. "I find that the past often speaks loudest when it has been silenced the longest." She gave a bitter laugh. "Claudia always believed that. You were close." "We were both unmarried, both private. It made for a quiet sort of understanding. But Claudia kept things to herself. Too much, perhaps." Poirot tilted his head. "Did she ever speak of a man named Addington?" Draycott stiffened, just slightly. "Only once, years ago. She said he was trouble, that she'd made a mistake by not speaking louder when it counted." "Did she suggest he had returned?" Draycott hesitated. But lately she was more distracted than usual. She kept staring at the tower during dinner. Sometimes I found her at her desk writing letters she never sent." "Letters?" "In her desk drawer. Torn-up drafts. I pieced together one. It said, 'He's back, but no one will believe me. They never did before.' That's all." Poirot thanked her and returned to Claudia's quarters. The room was untouched, the air stale with lavender and dust. He opened the writing desk again and began going through the discarded papers more carefully. Several were no more than shopping lists and lesson notes, but beneath the blotting paper, folded small, was a half-burnt note. "If I disappear, check the choir records from 1944. It all began there." C.F. Poirot's brows lifted. The trail was tightening. The next day, he asked Dr. Linley for the choir rosters from the war years. She hesitated. "We haven't maintained complete records," she said, "but you're welcome to check the old registers in the library attic. They were moved years ago." Poirot climbed the narrow stairs behind the stacks and found the attic exactly as described, crowded, musty, and lit by a single grimy window. He began combing through the boxes until, in a faded blue binder, he found the choir rolls. 1944. He turned the pages slowly. There were names beside each part: soprano, alto, contralto. Claudia Fielding's handwriting annotated each column. 2 names had been crossed out. One was smudged beyond recognition. The other remained legible: Eleanor Draycott. Poirot stared at the line. He ran his finger down the margin and found a faint notation in Claudia's hand. Voice withdrawn. Emotional distress. He sat back. Miss Draycott had never mentioned being in the choir, nor had she spoken of why she left. But something had driven her away, and Claudia had seen fit to record it, if discreetly. Descending the stairs, Poirot found himself crossing paths with Mr. Marsh again. "Ah, Monsieur Marsh," he said, pausing. "May I ask, are you fond of music?" Marsh blinked rapidly. I suppose. I play a little. Piano. And you are aware of the school's history, yes? Of its teachers during the war? I... Only what's in the common records. You never met Thomas Addington? No. His voice rose a little too sharply. Why would I? Poirot smiled gently. Curiosity, Monsieur Marsh. One must ask questions, even uncomfortable ones. That night, Poirot sat alone in the common room with a pile of notes and files spread before him. The candle beside him flickered as wind tapped at the old window panes. The past was forming a pattern. Claudia Fielding had uncovered something, a buried injustice, an erased truth. A man dismissed quietly, a girl's silence, a secret hidden beneath music and guilt. And then the note had arrived. She had gone to meet someone. But whom? Someone from within the school, or someone who knew its shadows well enough to move through them unseen? Poirot glanced again at the carbon sheet. If she talks, dangerous. Someone had typed that not in panic, but in planning. Tomorrow, Poirot would speak with Draycott again, but not to ask questions, to press, gently, with precision. For someone in St. Everilda's was trying desperately to keep the bell tower's secret buried. But secrets, Poirot knew, had a way of ringing out when least expected. Morning brought a thin light that crept slowly through the high windows of St. Everilda's, painting the wooden panels in long strokes of grey. Poirot was already dressed, his tie fastidiously knotted, his moustaches waxed with a symmetry that betrayed not even a minute of sleep lost. He had not needed much. The picture forming in his mind had grown clearer in the night, like a painting long obscured by smoke, but now gently wiped clean. Only a few brushstrokes remained to complete it. He requested tea in the common lounge, and from his seat by the window he watched the staff arrive one by one for their daily routine. Eleanor Draycott was the last to appear. Her face was pale, drawn tighter than before, her eyes hollowed. She avoided his gaze and went straight to the library. Poirot waited 15 minutes, then followed. She was at the far end of the reading room, shelving books with more force than necessary, her back rigid. Miss Draycott, Poirot said softly, if I might trouble you a moment. She turned slowly. Monsieur Poirot, she said, voice neutral, you seem to have found reason to haunt every corner of this place. He smiled. Not to haunt, merely to observe. You see, the truth, she is shy, but she leaves footprints. She folded her arms. And what footprints do you believe I've left? I believe you were in the choir in 1944, and I believe you left it very suddenly. Her expression hardened. I was 17. We change interests. Ah, Poirot said gently. But you see, mademoiselle, you did not merely change interests. Claudia Fielding wrote that you withdrew in distress. Draycott's lips parted slightly. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned away and began to reshelve a book that had already been shelved. She wrote that? Her voice had dropped to something quieter, brittle. She never said it to my face. Did she know why you left? I think she did, said Draycott, facing him now. I think she saw it, all of it. Poirot waited. There was a man, she said, a music tutor, who wasn't supposed to be one. He gave lessons in private. He wasn't part of the regular staff. Not really. He said he was there to help with morale during the war, that the school needed spirit. That's how he phrased it. Thomas Addington. She gave a small nod. He was charming, at first. Handsome, in that way that made the older girls blush and the staff avert their eyes. I liked him. So did Claudia. I think, she faltered, I think she admired him. But then she saw what he really was. Poirot did not speak. He allowed the silence to deepen. I was young, Draycott continued, but not blind. He took liberties. With his words, his hands. Not everyone noticed. Some didn't want to. But Claudia did, and when I stopped coming to choir, she confronted me. Did you tell her? I didn't have to. She knew, and she told him. I remember. I was in the corridor. I heard her voice, low and furious. She threatened to go to the board. The next week, he was gone. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but it was quiet, no scandal. Draycott gave a bitter laugh. It was wartime. No one wanted bad press. Girls from good families. Better to let him slip away. And yet Claudia stayed, Poirot said. Even after all that. She said she had to. That if she left, no one would remember what happened. Poirot nodded slowly. And did you ever see him again? Her eyes sharpened with fear. Once, years later, I thought it was him, near the old railway bridge, but when I looked again, he was gone. And Claudia? Poirot asked. Did she believe he'd returned? Draycott was quiet for a long moment. Then, she was convinced. That's what changed her. That's what made her afraid. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, mademoiselle. He left the library and walked directly to the tower. This time, he did not climb the stairs. He circled its exterior, stopping where the ivy climbed highest along the north face. There, half hidden beneath the foliage, was a small iron maintenance hatch. It had likely been forgotten or ignored. Poirot knelt, examining the frame. A rusted padlock hung through the latch, broken. He straightened, brushing off his gloves. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested that all members of the staff meet him in the chapel at 6 o'clock. Dr. Linley raised an eyebrow, but did not object. The pews were half filled when Poirot arrived. The air was thick with expectation and unease. I thank you all, he said, stepping to the front, for your cooperation these past days. It has allowed me to see what truly happened in the tower. Murmurs rippled through the room. Poirot raised a hand. Miss Claudia Fielding did not fall to her death by accident, nor was it a simple act of misadventure. She was lured there, and she died not from a fall, but from a deliberate push, a hand placed in the small of her back. Gasps broke from more than one mouth. Poirot's voice remained calm. She was summoned there by a typed note, delivered secretly. That note was written on a machine in the administration office, and it was not the only one. Several drafts were attempted. The carbon paper does not lie. He turned to Mr. Marsh. Monsieur Marsh, you had access to that machine. You were seen in the office long after hours, and you, perhaps by mistake, left traces of your intentions behind. Marsh's face went grey. I don't know what you mean. You knew Claudia Fielding was investigating something, and you knew she suspected someone had returned to St. Everilda's under a false name, someone who once committed grave offences here during the war. Poirot took a breath. The chapel held it with him. Thomas Addington disappeared in 1944, but he did not vanish. He changed his name, took work in minor schools, drifted, and then, with the war safely distant, he reappeared as a groundskeeper. Every eye turned slowly. Dennis Bray sat motionless at the back of the room, eyes flat. Poirot walked to him, unhurried. You kept to the edges. You said little, but you arrived at the tower just after Claudia's death. You claimed to have found the door locked, but it had been relocked from the inside. You must have known the hidden hatch beneath the ivy. Bray did not move. You feared she had discovered who you were, that she would expose you. And when she went up the tower, you followed, through the maintenance passage you once used during repairs. You confronted her. She told you. She had written letters, notes. She might have had proof. Poirot's voice lowered. You panicked. You pushed. You locked the hatch behind you and appeared moments later as the discoverer. A long silence fell. Then Bray stood. He said nothing. Poirot stepped back. You will not run. That I am certain of. You have been hiding all your life. Dr. Linley rose. Constable Redding is waiting outside. We anticipated. Poirot nodded. Then let justice resume where silence once ruled. As Bray was led from the chapel, Poirot turned back to the assembled staff. His expression, for once, was sombre. Miss Fielding tried to speak the truth twice, once in her youth, once in her final days. The second time cost her everything, but she has been heard. He bowed slightly and walked from the room, the echo of his footsteps soft against the stone, the weight of silence finally lifted. The following day dawned with a strange hush over St. Everilda's. The usual hum of bells and school routine moved forward, but beneath it all lay the residue of what had been revealed in the chapel. The staff avoided each other's eyes in the corridors, speaking in clipped phrases, as if afraid that even now the building might yield another secret. The girls, sharp as ever, had sensed the tremor in their teachers and whispered among themselves in corners and corridors, stories already taking shape that would echo long after the term was done. Poirot, however, was not yet finished. He sat at a small table in the staff lounge, a cup of thick chocolate before him, steam curling into the morning air. His hands were folded, his gaze steady. There was a faint furrow between his brows. Though the man who called himself Dennis Bray had been led away into custody and had confessed, quietly, bitterly, to the murder of Claudia Fielding, Poirot's thoughts were not at ease. The solution, though neat in appearance, left behind a ripple of disquiet. There remained threads not fully tied, shadows that moved when he thought they should not. He asked to see Dr. Linley once more. She received him in her office, her expression drawn and severe. There was no preamble. "You believe it's not over," she said simply. Poirot inclined his head. "It is my habit, madame, to trust what is said only after I have considered what has been unsaid. Monsieur Bray, yes, a man with a false name, a dark past. He feared exposure. He pushed Mademoiselle Fielding. But I ask myself, how did she know he had returned?" Dr. Linley looked away, as though steeling herself. "She had been digging into the old records. You saw the letter she left behind, about the choir, the archives." "Yes," said Poirot softly. "But something still does not sit squarely. She had suspicions. She sought confirmation. But someone else, before Bray, helped drive her toward the tower. The note, the typewritten summons. It was not in his style, not his tone. Too careful, too knowing." "You're saying someone else wanted her there?" Poirot nodded. "Or wanted her alone." Dr. Linley was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "You think there was a second player?" "I think," said Poirot gently, "that guilt is not always singular. It can move like a current, twisting, winding, through several hearts." He left her with that, and made his way once again to Claudia Fielding's room. The space had been left untouched since his last visit. But this time, Poirot did not look in the drawers or the wardrobe. He sat. He listened. The ticking of the small metronome still resting on the desk was faintly audible, though the mechanism had run down days ago. A memory of rhythm. Poirot's eyes moved to the window. The view overlooked the gardens, the edge of the forest, and just barely the side of the bell tower. He imagined her sitting here, night after night, staring into that dark silhouette, listening for a sound, waiting for proof of what she already feared was true. But it would take more than fear to compel her to act. Someone must have told her something, shown her something, or written to her. Poirot returned to the administrative office. He requested the mail ledger. The secretary on duty, a plain woman with quick eyes, handed it over without question. Poirot leafed through the entries for the weeks preceding Miss Fielding's death. There, on May 30th, a letter addressed to Miss Claudia Fielding. Sender unknown. The initials entered beside the record. A.D. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He asked to speak with Miss Draycott again. She met him in the conservatory this time. the air heavy with the scent of ferns and old roses. She looked tired. Her tone, however, had returned to its earlier coolness. "You have more questions," she said flatly. "Only one, mademoiselle. Did you write to Miss Fielding, anonymously, before she died?" Her stillness was answer enough. "I did," she said at last, "but not anonymously. I signed it. I said I feared something was happening in the school. I didn't think it was Bray. I thought—" She hesitated. "I thought she was slipping." Slipping? She hadn't been herself. She was haunted. I thought if I put it in writing, if I mirrored her paranoia, maybe she'd see how far she'd gone. I never meant for her to actually go to the tower." Poirot observed her carefully. And yet the note she received, the typed note, was unsigned. A trap. "I didn't write that," she said firmly. "I swear it." Poirot watched her. There was a weary sincerity in her voice, but also a tremble she hadn't had before. "You feared she would speak about the past?" Draycott looked away. Number I feared she wouldn't, that she'd keep it to herself until it ate her alive. And it did. Poirot was silent for a long moment, then rose. "One last thing, mademoiselle. The morning of her death, where were you at 6 o'clock?" She blinked. "In my room, preparing for class." "Alone?" "Yes. Why?" Poirot gave a gentle smile, only to complete the picture. He departed without further comment. That evening, Poirot reviewed his notes once more. He made no new deductions. He asked no more questions. But the next morning, he invited both Draycott and Mr. Marsh to the old music room. The room was untouched, preserved like a memory. Piano in the corner, music stands neatly stacked, old sheets pinned to the corkboard. Poirot gestured to the piano. "Monsieur Marsh, you said you played." Marsh hesitated. "A little." "Play something, anything." Marsh sat down, uncertain, and plucked out a simple tune, halting but recognizably Green Sleeves. Poirot turned to Eleanor Draycott. "Now you, mademoiselle, you were in the choir once." She shook her head. "That was a lifetime ago." "Even so, just a few notes." She stepped to the piano, exchanged seats with Marsh, and began to play something darker, melancholy, full-bodied. Chopin, a nocturne. Poirot closed his eyes. "Merci," he said when she stopped. "You see, music, like guilt, leaves its impression. It can be suppressed but not erased." He stepped forward, voice quiet but resonant. "There was a second person in that tower, someone who had known Claudia since the war, someone who also had reason to keep old truths buried." Draycott's eyes widened. "You're not saying—" "No," said Poirot. "You were not the killer, but you were the one who typed the note." She froze. He continued gently. "You feared she would speak, to the girls, to the governors, that she would undo decades of silence, so you wrote to her. You pretended to confirm her suspicions, hoping she would retreat from them. But when she didn't, you escalated. You sent the note, thinking she might have a moment of fear, perhaps even back out. You did not know Bray would act." Tears formed in Draycott's eyes. "I never meant—" "No, you did not push her, but you opened the door." Poirot stepped back. "And now, it is time for the door to close, on silence, on shame." He left her in the music room, the notes of the nocturne still echoing faintly in the air. He had only one visit left to make, to the bell tower. He climbed the stairs slowly, once more. At the top, he stood in the space where Claudia had died, alone now, but filled with the memory of what had been hidden for too long. He laid a single white rose on the stone floor, and with a final glance at the rope that had summoned so many to silence, he turned and descended into the light. The final days of term passed at St. Everilda's in a hush that felt almost sacred. The girls were quieter in the halls, more reverent in chapel. Teachers moved with a kind of suspended dignity, conscious that something immense had occurred, not loud or scandalous, but deep and quietly irreversible. The death of Miss Fielding had shifted something unspoken in the air, like the changing of a key in a long composition. Yet it was not grief alone that lingered. It was the weight of what had been unsaid for decades, and now, finally, could no longer be. Poirot, ever precise even in departure, made his final walk through the school grounds on a morning washed with silver fog. He moved with unhurried grace past the cloister arches, through the south corridor, where ivy tapped softly at the window panes. He stopped at the library to return a volume he had borrowed, a history of the school's founding, annotated in Claudia Fielding's hand. Then, quietly, he made his way toward the headmistress's office. Dr. Linley stood when he entered, her expression as composed as ever, but the fatigue behind her eyes betrayed a certain gratitude, relief, perhaps, that the truth at last had been spoken aloud. He inclined his head. "Madame, you have been most gracious and courageous." Her shoulders lifted only slightly. "It was overdue. We've always prided ourselves on producing young women of character, but for too long we left their protection to silence." Poirot gave a soft nod. "A silence born not of malice, I think, but of fear. And yet, as Mademoiselle Fielding herself wrote, it all began with the choir." "She never stopped carrying it," Linley murmured. "That sense that she'd failed to stop him soon enough." "She did not fail," Poirot replied. "She acted when others would not. And even in death, she led us back to what had been hidden." He placed a small folder on the desk, his compiled notes, witness statements, correspondence. "For your records, and for the governor's, should questions arise." Dr. Linley opened the folder, glanced at the neat script within, then looked up again. "And Eleanor?" Poirot's expression darkened only faintly. "She has resigned. A letter of her own choosing. It spares the school any further turmoil, and perhaps grants her the first peace she has known in years." Linley gave a slow nod. "It's strange. I always thought Eleanor was the strong one." "Strength wears many disguises," Poirot said gently. "Sometimes it is quiet endurance. Sometimes it is the courage to speak too late and still speak." He reached for his gloves, pulled them on with quiet finality. "One last question, if I may," she said before he turned. "Do you think he would have returned if Claudia hadn't discovered him? Would Bray, Addington have done anything again?" Poirot paused. "That, madame, we shall never know, but I suspect not. He had built for himself a new name, a life of rules and shadows. It was exposure, not opportunity, that provoked him. When truth knocked, he did what cowards always do. He struck first. And the others who knew, those who looked away in the 1940s. Poirot's brow lifted. "Some will carry it to their graves. Others have already done so. But it no longer belongs only to them." He turned to go, then stopped at the threshold. "There is something else." Dr. Linley looked up, expectant. Poirot gave the smallest of smiles. "The bell. It tolls now only at appointed hours. A sensible decision. But, perhaps, just once more. It should toll at dawn." Her gaze softened. "For her?" "For her," he said. Outside, the fog was lifting. Poirot walked past the old stone fountain, past the girls gathered near the rose trellis. Their chatter hushed as he passed. One of them, a tall girl with bright eyes and a brass prefect badge on her lapel, stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said. "Monsieur Poirot?" He turned with perfect courtesy. "Yes, mademoiselle?" "Was it true?" she asked. "What they said? That Miss Fielding was a hero?" Poirot looked at her, truly looked, and then nodded once. "Yes, she was." The girl held his gaze for a moment longer, then stepped back, satisfied. As he turned the corner of the building, he heard the soft murmur of her voice, repeating those words to her friends, like a secret worth keeping. Poirot's cab awaited at the edge of the long gravel drive. As the driver secured his small luggage in the boot, Poirot turned once more to gaze back at the tower. It stood still now, silent as stone, framed by sunlight. No mystery left to conceal, no secret clinging to its shadows. He stepped into the cab. As they pulled away, he did not look back again. But he knew, with the certainty of his little grey cells, that the echoes would remain, for those who listened, and for those who, like Claudia Fielding, had never truly stopped listening. The train northward to London rolled quietly through the moors, its carriages shivering with a rhythm that matched Poirot's thoughts. He sat alone in a first-class compartment, back straight, gloved hands resting upon his knees, eyes watching the countryside blur past with its hedgerows and stone walls and slow-moving sheep. But his mind was not on the scenery. It lingered, as it often did, on the traces people left behind. Faint gestures, inflections in voice, a glance that spoke more than words. The case at St. Everilda's was resolved in the legal sense, but Poirot never permitted the law to define the limits of truth. He had left the school with answers, and for most, a sense of closure. And yet, as he sat beneath the whistle of the train's steady hum, a memory surfaced, a detail nearly forgotten, too minor at the time to merit suspicion, yet now, in stillness, it glowed faintly with significance. It was the brass key, the one found in Claudia Fielding's handbag, the one she had always kept on a ribbon, neatly tied. It was believed to be the tower key, the same one used to lock herself inside. And yet, Poirot now recalled the feel of the metal between his fingers. The teeth of the key were short, jagged, with a slant uncommon to older British locks. He had assumed it fit the tower door, but he had never tested it himself. There had been another. Lock in the school. A drawer. No, a box. Yes, in the music room. At the back, where the percussion instruments were kept. It had been padlocked, rusted shut. Claudia's key would not fit the tower. It would fit that. The implications moved through his mind with the softness of snowfall, one thought falling atop another. The lock, the key, the box, and Claudia's letter. If I disappear, check the choir records from 1944. It all began there. Had she left more? Poirot reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a small leather notebook. He turned to the final page where, as was his custom, he kept entries not of fact, but of instinct. Here, in shorthand, were 3 names and a question mark beside each. Eleanor Draycott, Roland Marsh, Judith Haynes. The nurse had never been drawn into suspicion. She had given valerian root. She had kept to the background. But she had also been at the school in the war years. And more than once, Poirot had caught a look pass between her and Claudia. Quiet, unreadable, but not unfamiliar. Was it loyalty or guilt? Poirot turned another page and added a single phrase, something still unsaid. That night, upon reaching London, Poirot did not return home immediately. Instead, he wrote a telegram. to Headmistress Linley, St. Everilda's request. Secure music room padlocked box immediately. Do not open. Hold for my return. Matter not yet closed. H.P. He waited a moment, then added a second note. To Miss Judith Haynes, CEO Infirmary. St. Everilda's regret leaving without proper farewell. One final matter needs your kind memory. Expect letter. H.P. 3 days passed. Poirot spent them reviewing wartime records at the Ministry of Education, cross-referencing staff lists from independent girls' schools. He found 3 entries for Addington, all under different variations of his name. But more importantly, he found mention of a staff nurse assigned to temporary posts during 1943 and 1944, a Miss J. Havers. It was a name later changed to Haynes. Poirot sat in his armchair that evening, firelight flickering against his polished shoes, and let the weight of it settle. The truth, it seemed, did not always arrive in a burst of revelation. Sometimes it crept forward like ivy on stone, unnoticed until it had grown into the very cracks themselves. The next morning he returned to St. Everilda's. The bell tower loomed just as it had before, but it seemed quieter now, gentler somehow in its silence. Dr. Linley met him at the gate, holding the same composure, though her eyes showed the same question he had come to answer. "We secured the box," she said, "just as you asked. It's in my office." They walked together in silence. The corridors were warm with late spring air, windows open, and the sound of a piano floated faintly from a distant classroom. Inside her office, the box sat on the desk. It was old and wooden, the padlock still unbroken. Poirot examined it once more, then withdrew Claudia's brass key and fitted it into the rusted lock. It clicked open with reluctant ease. He lifted the lid. Inside, a collection of letters, tied in a red silk ribbon, lay beside a slim leather diary and a small cloth bag. He removed the diary first, opening it gently. The handwriting was Claudia's. June 5th. He is here. I saw him again. No mistake this time. He walks differently now, slower, but the face is the same. The others do not see him, or they pretend not to. Only Judith met my eyes when I tried to speak of it. She said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. I fear it will happen again. Poirot closed the diary with reverence. He opened the cloth bag next. Inside were 3 objects: a broken tuning fork, a key to a dormitory, and a brooch. He held the brooch up to the light. It bore the emblem of the school, the bell tower etched in miniature gold, and a single initial on the back, A, not Claudia's, not Eleanor's. Poirot turned to the letters, untying them carefully. They were written by a girl named Anne Greeley, a name that had not appeared in any roster, any archive, but here, in a trembling hand, she wrote of lessons taken after hours, of promises made, of fears not believed. The final letter was unfinished. "Miss Fielding, I am sorry. I should have spoken. But you saw what he did. You were there. If anything happens to me—" The ink trailed off. Poirot replaced the letters, his heart suddenly heavier than the day he had left the school. He turned to Dr. Linley. "Mademoiselle Fielding did not keep these for sentiment," he said. "She kept them as evidence. In the absence of justice, then, she preserved the memory." Linley said nothing, her hands pale against the wood of the desk. Poirot nodded slowly. "There is one last person I must speak to." He found Nurse Haynes seated near the small rose garden, coat drawn over her lap despite the warmth. She looked up as he approached, unsurprised. "I wondered how long it would take you." Poirot sat beside her. "You knew." She didn't deny it. "I was young. I'd just begun. They sent me here after my first placement in London. I saw things I wasn't prepared for, heard things I didn't want to believe. But Claudia believed." "She believed too much," Haynes said. "She saw it happening, and she confronted him. But the board buried it, transferred him quietly, told her to stop pressing. She never forgave them." "And you?" "I stayed quiet," she whispered. "We all did. But I watched her carry it, all these years. I tried to help, small ways, but it was never enough." Poirot's voice was soft. "When she died, you suspected." Haynes nodded. "But I didn't know it would come from Eleanor, not her. She sent the note, but she did not push." "No," said Haynes, "but sometimes guilt moves faster than hands ever could." They sat in silence, the scent of roses drifting around them. Poirot stood. "She left everything for someone to find." "She hoped it would be you," Haynes said, smiling faintly. "She used to quote you in the common room, you know. order and method, and the little grey cells. Poirot looked away for a moment. Then, hat in hand, he bowed slightly. "I shall leave again, but this time I believe she may rest." And with that, he returned once more to the tower, not to investigate, but to leave behind a single slip of paper beneath the bell rope. On it, he wrote only this: "You were right, Mademoiselle Fielding." They listened. The bell tower stood unchanged, its stones weathered, its silence heavy. But in the space beneath it, where Claudia Fielding had fallen, something had lifted. Not the grief, not the injustice. Those would linger, as they always do in places where the past is not truly past. But a weight had shifted, as if the tower itself had exhaled, as if its stones, after decades of listening, had finally heard the truth spoken aloud. Poirot descended the spiral stairs slowly, each step measured. He paused halfway down, one hand resting lightly on the cold iron rail. From here, the narrow window slit offered a glimpse of the eastern grounds, the path curving past the rose garden, where he had last spoken to Judith Haynes. She was gone now, taken leave for rest, or perhaps something more permanent. He suspected it would be her final term at St. Everilda's. Some truths required distance to bear. Below, the corridor was quiet, not deserted, but softened. The girls were in afternoon lessons. The air was filled with that still hush of an institution going about its business again. Repaired, but not the same. He turned toward the music room one final time. It was unlocked now. Inside, the scent of wax polish and old manuscript paper lingered. Claudia's desk sat in its usual place beneath the window, and though her chair had been tucked neatly beneath it, Poirot could see the faint depression in the floorboards, where it had rested for decades. In the corner, the piano had been closed. He walked to it and lifted the lid. The keys were yellowed at the edges, but smooth under his fingers. He did not play. He merely touched them, like reading braille on an old letter. On top of the piano sat a bound leather folder, new. Curious, Poirot opened it. Inside were neatly transcribed copies of Claudia's letters, the diary entries, and Anne Greeley's final note. At the front, a printed dedication. "This record has been preserved in confidence by the Board of St. Everilda's for internal archival purposes. It is not a public document. It is a memory." At the bottom, a simple line. It all began with the choir. C.F. Poirot closed the folder gently. It was a gesture, yes, but an important one. Silence could never be erased, but memory could be recorded. The school would go on, but it would not forget her. Footsteps approached. He turned to find Doctor Linley in the doorway, her arms folded loosely, her expression unreadable. "We've decided to hold a small service," she said. "Just the staff and sixth form girls. Nothing official, but something that feels honest." Poirot inclined his head. "That is wise. One must not mourn only in silence." She stepped into the room and looked around. She spent her whole life here, taught half the governor's daughters to sing, never married, never complained, just kept going. She waited, Poirot said gently, for the right person to listen. Linley sighed. "And still I wonder. Could it all have been avoided?" Poirot did not answer quickly. Not all. There are things, madame, that no vigilance can prevent. But others, yes. If the world had believed her earlier, if shame had not outweighed truth, if we did not fear discomfort more than we feared injustice. And now, he said, there is the record, and the choice to do better. She smiled faintly, then walked to the piano, brushing dust from the edge of the bench with the back of her hand. "I never told her," she said, voice low, "but I sang in the choir too. 1 year only. I was terrible." Poirot smiled. "And she was patient?" "Excruciatingly. Linley said. She once said, "No one sings well in fear." I didn't understand her then. I think I do now. Poirot turned, taking one last look at the room. It felt complete. He made his way down the corridor and out into the late afternoon sun. The wind had shifted, brighter now, less burdened. As he stepped toward the gravel drive, a small voice called from behind him. "Monsieur Poirot!" He turned. It was the same prefect he had spoken with days before, the girl with the brass badge and steady gaze. She held out a piece of folded paper. "I found this under the lid of the choir piano. Miss Fielding must have hidden it. I thought it was part of the records, but it wasn't in the new folder." Poirot accepted it delicately and unfolded the page. The paper was lined, the ink old. It read, "If I cannot stop him, perhaps someone else will. This place, it remembers, not with stone or bell, but with those who stay. Don't let the fear win. Let them sing. Let them speak. Let them be louder than I was. CF." He folded it silently and looked at the girl. "You did well to bring this." "Is it important?" she asked. Poirot paused, then said, with all the solemnity of his many cases behind him, "It is the most important thing." She nodded, satisfied, and ran back toward the hall. Poirot watched her go, then turned toward the waiting cab. As the driver loaded his case and opened the door, he took one final look at the tower. Not for answers now, but as a man might look at a closed book. Not forgotten, simply read. Inside the cab, he sat upright, glancing once at the folded page in his lap, before tucking it into the breast pocket of his coat. The truth had been painful, but it had spoken, and in the speaking, it had given something back. As the car pulled away and the gates of St. Everilda's closed gently behind him, Poirot allowed himself a rare moment of quiet. He would not write this case up for the papers. There would be no headlines, no parade of names. It had not been a grand affair of poisons or jewels or blood. It had been something quieter, older, more enduring, the kind of mystery that leaves no corpse, but many ghosts. But he had listened, and they, at last, had been heard. In the days that followed, Poirot returned to London not to rest, but to reflect. The city bustled around him, omnibuses clattered, shopkeepers shouted, and the thrum of life moved undisturbed, but within his tidy flat on the second floor of Whitehaven Mansions, all was still. The curtains remained slightly drawn, letting in soft filtered light that cast no harsh shadows. He sat in his usual chair, hands folded, eyes distant. The affair at St. Everilda's had ended in a manner that satisfied justice, yes, but satisfaction was not always the measure Poirot sought. There was a difference, he believed, between resolution and peace. He opened his notebook once more, the one where he had documented not only the facts of the case, but the feelings, the impressions, those subtleties that never made it into official reports, yet defined the shape of the truth. There was something about Claudia Fielding's final note that had not left him. Let them sing. Let them speak. The phrase played on a loop in his mind. It was not just a plea, it was a legacy. But even legacies, Poirot knew, could be misunderstood, sanitized, polished for public comfort. A week passed before he acted again. One afternoon, beneath a light grey sky, Poirot made his way to the offices of the Board of Governors of St. Everilda's, a modest stone building tucked behind a row of banks near Russell Square. He arrived precisely on time, as was his habit, and was shown into a room that smelled of old furniture wax and ink. There, 4 individuals waited for him, 2 women, 2 men, each dignified, deliberate, and carefully neutral in expression. The chairwoman, Lady Halberton, offered him a seat. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a practiced smile, "we received your request. We understand you wish to discuss the records?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, madame. I am grateful for your time." "We were under the impression the case had been resolved," one of the men said briskly, adjusting his cufflinks. "The staff member has been arrested. There is no further threat to the school." "Indeed," Poirot replied, "but this is not about threat. It is about truth, the completeness of it." He reached into his attaché and removed a second copy of the leather-bound folder he had found atop the piano. He placed it on the table with care. "This contains the original letters of Mademoiselle Fielding, the diary she kept during her final weeks, and the correspondence of one Anne Greeley, whose name, I believe, appears nowhere in your official archives." Lady Halberton's brow creased. "I beg your pardon?" "Anne Greeley," Poirot said gently. "A girl who studied at St. Everilda's in 1944. A girl who sang in the choir. A girl who disappeared from the records following a brief and traumatic tenure here. Her letters were kept by Mademoiselle Fielding as proof, should anyone ever wish to know the full story." One of the women leaned forward. "We were told there were complications during the war, staff shortages, gaps in record-keeping, that some students were sent away." "Some were," Poirot agreed, "but others, like Anne, were simply erased." There was a silence. Lady Halberton spoke slowly. "Monsieur Poirot, these materials, if they were to become public, could harm the school's reputation." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, it is the concealment that caused harm, not the revelation. Claudia Fielding lived and died under the weight of that silence. She waited her whole life for someone to take responsibility. She left behind, not scandal, but clarity." The room seemed to narrow slightly, the air thickening. "What would you have us do?" the cuff-linked man asked. Poirot looked down at the folder. "Preserve the record. Do not hide it. Keep it within your archives, accessible, not broadcast, not paraded, but acknowledged, and more importantly, speak her name. Claudia and Anne." Another pause. Then Lady Halberton reached for the folder and rested her hand upon it. "It will not be buried," she said quietly. "Not this time." Poirot gave a slight bow. Later, as he stepped into the cold sunlight, he felt no great triumph. Only a quiet settling, like a clock coming back into alignment. There would be no ceremony, no accolades. But something had shifted. The bell had tolled, and its echo would not vanish so easily this time. In the weeks that followed, Poirot returned to his routines. He dined at his favourite café on the Strand. He read his morning papers with fastidious attention. He argued amiably with his housekeeper over the alignment of the cushions. But sometimes, late at night, he found himself at his desk, pen in hand, writing out thoughts not meant for the public eye. He wrote of Claudia, not as a victim, but as a guardian, a keeper of memory, a woman who had waited far too long to be believed. He wrote of Eleanor Draycott, and of guilt that turns quiet people into unwilling accomplices. He wrote of Nurse Haynes, and the courage it takes to remain, even after the worst. And he wrote of the girls, those who had sung once in innocence, those who would sing again with awareness. One evening, as summer turned to autumn and the wind shifted in the London air, a small envelope arrived at his door. It bore no return address, but the paper was school issue, and the handwriting young, if practiced. Inside was a single page. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for listening. We read some of the letters in choir today. Our teacher said it was a lesson in courage. We didn't sing well, but we sang anyway. I think Miss Fielding would have liked that." A girl from St. Everilda's Poirot folded the letter slowly and pressed it flat on the desk. He looked toward the window, where the gas lamps outside cast gentle light across the sill. Then he reached for his pen, and in his small, elegant script, wrote one final line beneath the last entry in his notebook. "The affair at St. Everilda's is concluded. The truth has been spoken, and it endures, in the voices that refuse silence. He closed the notebook, carefully aligned it with the others on the shelf, and extinguished the lamp. Outside, somewhere far from London, a bell tolled softly in the distance, no longer warning, no longer mourning, but simply ringing because it was meant to be heard. The autumn air had turned sharp by the time Hercule Poirot next saw the bell tower. He had not expected to return to St. Everilda's again, not so soon, and not under such personal circumstance. But when the invitation arrived, handwritten by Dr. Linley herself, and enclosed with a simple line of music, a treble clef followed by 5 soft notes, he understood the intent immediately. They were holding a memorial, not a grand affair, not an official ceremony, something quiet, intimate, honest. He arrived at the school just before dusk, the last of the sun catching on the chapel windows, as if in quiet reverence. The building stood as it always had, austere and certain. But the mood had shifted. There was no longer the same sense of avoidance in the staff's eyes, nor fear in the girls' whispered voices. There was, instead, acknowledgement, the kind that does not come from punishment or guilt, but from truth spoken and heard. In the chapel, beneath the arched ceiling and the tall, unadorned windows, a few rows of staff, students, and former pupils sat in silence. A small brass plaque had been mounted near the front pew. In memory of Claudia Fielding, teacher, witness, guardian of truth. She let them sing. Dr. Linley approached as Poirot stood near the door. She said little, only nodded, her eyes softer than before. Together they took their seats in the front pew as the choir began to assemble at the rear of the room. No sermon was given, no eulogies offered, only music. The girls sang, not perfectly, but with earnestness. The opening note was slightly sharp. One voice trembled, but they did not stop. The harmony found its shape by the second verse, and by the third, the notes hung with clarity. As they sang, Poirot looked to the high window above the altar. Through the leaded glass, he could just make out the outline of the tower. It no longer felt like a threat. When the final note faded and silence reclaimed the room, Dr. Linley stood. "There are no speeches," she said, "only a promise, to remember what was forgotten, to protect what was vulnerable, and to give voice to those who once had none." Poirot said nothing, but his heart echoed the sentiment. After the service, he walked once more along the corridor beside the music room, now locked for the evening. In the window glass, he caught his own reflection, older, lined, composed as always. But beside it, he thought, perhaps foolishly, he saw another shape, a woman's silhouette, upright and calm, a teacher as she had once stood, alone but unyielding. He turned to face it, but there was only the corridor and the evening light. Later that night, back in London, Poirot sat by his fire with a fresh cup of tisane, his notebook unopened beside him. He had no need to write this one. The case was solved, yes, but more than that, it was settled. Not all stories required publication. Some required only remembrance. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed the last letter from Claudia Fielding, the one he had kept since the day it was discovered beneath the lid of the choir piano. He had read it many times. Tonight he read it again. "Let them sing. Let them speak. Let them be louder than I was." He folded it gently and returned it to its place. Then, with one final sip of tea and a glance at the stillness of the city beyond his window, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a quiet smile. Justice had been served, but more importantly, silence had been broken, and in its place, music rose, imperfect, human, and true.